To grow your glutes to the point where people are questioning whether you had a BBL or if you are wearing pads in your leggings, then look no further, because here are my top 5 tips for building your glutes. First one is that hypertrophy or muscle building is a continuum, not a single rep range, so make sure to use it to your advantage. So this is what I mean by that. If you want to grow your glutes, and you probably have seen people do, let's say 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. What happens if you don't change things up is that at some point you will hit a plateau, because you've been doing that exercise for 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps, you've been pushing the weights, you've been working really hard, but at some point you just cannot add any more weight, you're stuck. What to do. So when it comes to hypertrophy, there is a lot of factors that you can consider, and one of them is rep ranges. So generally speaking, the lower rep ranges are more suited for building strength, whereas I would say middle rep ranges, let's say from 4 to probably 15 plus, are more suited for hypertrophy or muscle building. The key thing when it comes to building your muscles is progressive overload, because progressive overload means that you basically keep making your muscles work harder than they are used to, which is how you force them to adapt, okay? Because think about it, if I forever do 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps with, let's say, 20 kgs for dumbbell RDLs, my muscles need to adapt in order to basically be able to move that load, right? But once I'm able to do it, they don't have to adapt any further. There's no reason for them to grow bigger, to grow stronger, because now they're at the point where they can easily do it. So you need to make sure that you keep challenging your muscles. This is also how soreness occurs. So probably if you change things up, you'll see that you get sore, or maybe if you train harder, or if you increase weight, all of a sudden you're sore again. It is because your muscles aren't used to. Now, this soreness isn't the only indicator or the main indicator for muscle building or muscle growth, but it is something that shows you like, hey, you have probably been doing something that you haven't done before, which is why you experience this soreness, because your muscles aren't used to it. So referring this back to hypertrophy, what you could do is you could introduce periodization into your program, into your workout routine. So ideally, you would want to do the same weekly workouts for consecutive weeks. Let's say that you do the same thing for a month. So your weekly schedule is repeated for 4 consecutive weeks. So after those 4 weeks, you could introduce some variability in order to kind of change things up. So one of the things that I really like to do, especially with my intermediate lifters, is I would basically switch between periods of accumulating volume with periods of intensifying things. What I mean by that is that I would have a little bit higher volume for a month, and then the month after I would slightly reduce volume, but I would increase intensity by lowering the rep ranges or scaling down the reps, making them lift a little bit heavier. And then after that month, I would go back and accumulate volume again, probably a little bit more than I did with the first month, and I would go up in reps again. So this way, I am utilizing all the reps in the hypertrophy continuum of rep ranges, allowing me to almost kind of step aside. So I think that one of the fastest ways to grow, not only in the gym with your muscles, but in life, is if you hit a plateau, instead of trying to push through, try to step to the side, take another vehicle, change your rep ranges, focus on building your strength, and then after a while you can come back to that previous path maybe that you were on, and then you realize that you kind of took this shortcut. So instead of just doing 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps, utilize this entire continuum that you have available, because even building strength and even being in the really high rep ranges also has its benefits, because if you work in the really high rep ranges, you could increase your work capacity, and then if you come back to the hypertrophy rep range, 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps no longer feels like cardio. And the same holds for building your strength in the lower rep ranges. As you can imagine, if I hit a plateau, for example, with my deadlifts with 8 reps, I just cannot go any heavier. If I would take a period where I would really focus on building my strength, then when I come back to those 8 reps again, I can probably increase the resistance. So you have to find this sweet spot between doing the same thing for a period of time in order to progressive overload, but then also introducing periodization in order to keep progressively overloading over time. My second tip is to train hard, but to also train smart.
One little tip though, to come down much slower. Yeah.
That's the hardest
thing. Well,
well,
hard is better. That's what it's all about. Because you got 2 levels to the strength. You got the positive that's coming up.
Yeah.
But stronger is going down. You got more strength. So if you're going through it quickly like you are and you're hitting the bottom like that means you're going to exhaust the positive. Yeah. You're going to go to failure. That's great. But in the negative, you've still got strength there. Yeah. So you've got to slow it down, and also it's safer for your knees.
So whenever you're training, you need to make it yourself difficult. You need to actively fight resistance, try to increase your time under tension, try to train with good form. It is not just something that is like a checklist where, oh, I've done 12 reps, like check, I did it. Try to make it yourself difficult. Whenever you're doing a hip thrust, for example, try to hold the top of the movement maybe for a short while without just instantly going back down again. Like really try to make your muscles work for the movement. Also, training is a skill. So see every session as just a practice session where you can become better at your form, where you can become better at targeting the attended muscle. You really have to almost see it as an art. But also train smart. So for me, for example, you wouldn't catch me doing very, very heavy hip thrusts in the lower rep ranges very often, just because it is pretty fatiguing for your entire body. And my goal isn't to build my strength necessarily in my glutes, it's mainly to build my glutes itself, to build the muscle. So you would catch me in the hypertrophy rep range more frequently, which is a moderate rep range with a more moderate load, instead of doing like the lower rep range with really high load. Because as I said, it's not my goal. So for me, it doesn't really make sense to have this very fatiguing style of training, even though it does have a purpose, as I said in my previous tip. If you want to keep progressively overloading, at one point, maybe it is smart for you to think like, I'll have a phase where I focus on building my strength, but you wouldn't catch me doing them very frequently just because it's very fatiguing, it's very heavy for your central nervous system. So for me, it's really a balance between training really hard, but training really hard isn't necessarily just by using more weights. It's also by all the other factors that come into consideration whenever you are training. Tip number 3 is to include different movement patterns. So whenever you want to grow your glutes, there are different exercises that target them in a different way. And I always like to make sure that I include exercises that would target my glutes or that are the heaviest when the glutes are at the shortened position. Think about your hip thrusts or your bridges. I would include exercises that are the hardest when the glutes are at the lengthened position, for example, an RDL. And then I would also include exercises that are hardest somewhere at the mid-range, for example, a squat variation. I also make sure that I include unilateral exercises, because think about it, any muscle that's on the back side of your body, so your back, your glutes, it's hard because you can't see them in the mirror whenever you're training. So you are bound to developing imbalances there, and probably the side that you like right with is probably your stronger side, is probably your bigger side. So make sure to include unilateral exercises to kind of combat these imbalances. And then with unilateral work, what you want to do is start with your weaker side first and then match the work with your stronger side. Tip number 4 is to make sure that you eat enough, because it is very difficult for your muscles to grow if you don't have enough energy available for them to actually grow. You don't have to necessarily be in a bulking journey, as that I currently am, but at least make sure that you get an adequate amount of protein in, because whenever muscle protein synthesis takes place, you need to have an adequate amount of protein in your system in order for that to actually occur. So make sure that you eat enough protein, make sure that you eat enough in general, general, and then you set yourself up for success for making sure that your glutes can actually grow. And then tip number 5 is the frequency of your training. So if you train your glutes twice per week, you'll have significantly more gains compared to whenever you're only training them once per week. Technically, you could train them more frequently, for example, 3 times per week. It's a little bit more tricky in terms of recovery, so you have to do a little bit more thinking with regards to your entire program, but training them twice would be really good if you can. So how I go about it is that my split always changes depending on how frequently I can train. Now, if you say I only want to train my glutes, then obviously you would have 2 glute sessions per week. But if you, for example, want to train the rest of your body too, then you would probably benefit most from a full body split, because then you would train your entire body twice per week. Now, if you want to go to the gym 3 times per week, then you could, for example, say, okay, I'll do a full body workout, and then I'll do an upper body workout and a lower body workout. So I would still both hit my upper and my lower body twice per week. It kind of depends on your schedule, but as I always say, it depends on your schedule, but make sure that you adjust your training based on your schedule instead of, I guess, the other way around. So be realistic with yourself and know how often you can make it to the gym, how often you can train, and then make sure that you base your split on whatever you can do in order to not leave any gains on the table. So those are my top 5 tips for building the glutes to the point where you will get BBL comments probably pretty soon. Good luck.